to addressing. Welcome again to Spirit and Mind, where we are committed to addressing current affairs with faith and mental health perspectives. I'm Bishop Guy Robinson, and I count it a blessing to be with you today. And joining me, as always, is Dr. Shepard. Good day, Dr. Shepard.
Yes, sir. Good day to you, Bishop. How are you doing?
All is well. All is well. Great weather today in this mid-Atlantic area, at least.
It is. I was outside, had to go into the office to do a couple of special projects, and yeah, it was nice. Walk outside, not necessarily need a heavy coat, and hopefully those who are here in this area get a chance to enjoy the weather. We know this weather is quite unpredictable, and for those who are down in Alabama, Georgia, in that area, we do send our thoughts and prayers for those who have encountered that tornado outbreak. And we know that even severe weather is forecasted again for this weekend. So please, we do send our thoughts and prayers to everyone down there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you, Spirit and Mind family, for joining us. We're so grateful to have you with us. Please feel free to let someone know and to share that Spirit and Mind is on. And we welcome your engagement. In fact, we'll be talking a little bit about some things we asked you to consider looking at last week. And so we want to do some follow-up to that in just a moment. In fact, Minister Kat is our great assistant, and she may have the list of home assignments we gave, and we'll get that ready to put it up in a few minutes. But first, we always get an update from Dr. Shepard. So grateful for him and how he keeps us up to date on the latest developments. So, Dr. Shepard, what should we be mindful of, aware of? What should we be doing, thinking about?
Yes. So again, good afternoon to all those who are out there. And please go ahead and share and like this particular episode of the broadcast. Just before I share that, Bishop, I want to let people know to remind them to go to spiritandmind.vidflex.tv to make sure that you are able to catch up and review. And you don't even have to catch up. Some of you just want to go back and just look and hear some of the episodes. And I will be doing that even as God continues to give us more projects to go back and look at some of these episodes have really been life changing. So spiritandmind.vidflex.tv, and you'll do yourself some good by going there. Again, share. What I'm going to begin with today is a theme. I've kind of been doing this for the last few episodes, but it really coincides with where we are in our country. And the thing today is beware of the plateau. Beware of the plateau. Now, when you think about plateaus are areas, it could be a land area, or it could be something else where you have a relatively stable or level period or condition. So the things about plateaus is that they level off. And so the thing that if I go to the medical piece first, is that yes, the virus has come down in regards to the number of people contracting it. Unfortunately, Bishop, it has plateaued, and it has plateaued between 50 and 60,000 cases per day. That's not per week. 50 to 60,000 cases per day. So please remember that. It has plateaued, and we've seen this plateau happen before. It plateaued in the middle of fall around October, and then we saw the surge right after the holidays. We now have seen a plateau after we peaked, and we had a real high peak in January. Actually, that was the highest peak that we've had since the pandemic started, and now we have plateaued. And let me tell you, this plateau is nothing to get excited about. That's the medical point. Plateaus, when you're dealing with viruses, you don't want to plateau. You want to keep going down. What I want to tell you is that in the midst of all that we're doing, it's nice to hear that the hospitalizations and deaths and the death rates have gone down, but it's not good to hear the plateau. We have to be aware of the plateau. Beware of the plateau. Plateaus are dangerous when eradicating a virus. It could cause one to think that everything is okay. It could cause us to think that we can throw our mask off. It could cause us to think that I'm good. I can now start having these outings. Such a beautiful day. I can invite all the people I want to my home. You're wrong. You're in error. You have to beware of the plateau, because at the end of the plateau, if you're not careful, you'll have a great surge. You'll continue to go up. And so, even though we level off, I know a lot of us like to be stable. Say, oh man, we're good now. When it comes to certain things in your life, now I'm switching over, you don't ever want to get to a plateau. The thing that has happened with this pandemic is that some of us have plateaued when it comes to thinking that we're good. I'm good now in my house. I'm good. People are safe. And we have gotten to almost a level of comfortability because it's been a whole year. Again, beware the plateau. This is not the time to decide that I'm not going to pursue a certain dream, pursue a certain education or degree. Beware of the plateau, because you become complacent. You become complacent with the things to fend off the spiritual wickedness, as they say, in high places. And so I just want us to be aware that of the plateau, this is not a place to stay. There's certain destinations that you get to, and I know that we all want to get to that place, but the plateau is not the place where we want to be at right now. We want to keep going higher. We want to keep going higher spiritually, but we also want to kill this virus so that we can eradicate it and put it at a place that it is low, to where it's not harming so many people at the same time. And let's not be apathetic. That's the last part. That means lack of motivation. That's one of the biggest things that I fear that I've seen throughout this pandemic. The level of apathy has increased greatly. Again, that is part of plateauing. So beware of the plateau. That's my message for us today. Keep doing what you know, and I'll leave that alone, because Bishop, I have a feeling we're going to have to deal with this plateauing in a future episode, especially as we get closer to when churches may be opening up. So I'm just kind of throwing a tease out there.
Understood, and that's good. And the plateau is applicable and wise counsel medically. And as you were alluding to, it switches over and applies to some larger things about human nature. So that's powerful. I was reading some things about the history, even as it concerns the pandemic of 1918. And while you were talking, you brought that back to my remembrance, because historians make note of a kind of sense of complacency during the 1918 pandemic that caused a resurgence eventually because of relaxed mindsets, and people having been in that situation for so long, they just needed in their minds something for their own reprieve. And so it's amazing how history is repeating itself in some ways, which is sort of indicative of human nature. So that's powerful. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. About it, just seems to be something about human nature that what are we learning from the 1918 experience, not just medically, but in terms of who we are.
Yeah, well, Ecclesiastes, and I was studying a little bit about that even this past week. It says nothing new under the sun. And so it reminds us that a lot of things that we have encountered and will encounter, people have gone through it before. And unfortunately, there are certain trends that we have definitely experienced before, and we're now going to see cycle through. I'm so grateful for those of you all out there who got your second vaccination. I see people out there, Bishop, you see that they're commenting, and that's wonderful. We're glad that you got it, but you can't get complacent. You can't get on that plateau. You can't think that everything is well. We're still investigating whether or not can we take the mask off, because even if you're vaccinated, you can still potentially transmit the virus. And so we want to be careful that even if you're vaccinated, that doesn't mean that the virus can't enter you. All the vaccine does is it causes it not to cause severe illness to you. So you can carry a virus and yet not be affected or infected. Well, I won't say infected. You can be infected, but it not affect you greatly. So even in that, there's a lot of connotation that we can get from that. The virus can be inside of you, but it not affect you to where it causes you to go into the hospital or even death. but you can carry that thing and then transmit it to somebody else who is not vaccinated, and then it can have devastating effects on them. So we can't let the plateau affect us now.
Understood. I was going to say the same thing. Thank you, Spirit of Mind family. We enjoyed the dialogue, and thank you. Good afternoon to everyone who is joining us today, and thank you for being a part of Spirit of Mind. And I'm glad to see the persons who are reporting their their vaccinations without symptoms. Is some of the reports in there. So grateful to hear that, and of course, Sister Allen. Of course, we're praying for you and praying for all of our Spirit of Mind family. But Sister Allen, we're praying for you. See that in the chat line. And Pastor Thomas, of course, who is my brother, absolutely. And so I'm, of course, lifting him in prayer every day. And so anyway, we are grateful that you are with us. And we have been talking about, and thank you for joining us last week. And we've been talking about living your best life, and we've covered several areas of that. Living your best life spiritually, living your best life intellectually, living your best life physically, living your best life socially and economically. And now we are at the living your best life emotionally. This is last week we talked a little bit about going into this subject, and we recapped some things we talked about in previous Spirit and Mind episodes about emotional regulation. And so we'd love to see if any of you have any responses. We asked a couple of questions last week. Please feel free to join in the chat line on any of these questions as we continue today. What is emotional intelligence? In what ways have you become more aware of your emotions? These were some questions we just put out there for your contemplation and response. But what things have triggered your emotions this week is what we wanted to know. How would you rate your month of March emotionally from 1 to 10? 1 meaning calm and 10 meaning chaos. How would you rate your week this week? Should you care to share, we certainly would love to celebrate and rejoice with those that do rejoice and cover in prayer those who are in need of prayer. How did you deal with those crises? These were some of the questions that we asked, and hopefully they provoked some introspection. We'll talk about the importance of that as we continue. Dr. Shepherd, what are some things we should keep in mind about living your best life emotionally?
Yeah, Bishop, as you were going over those questions, I actually wanted to answer some of those questions personally. I think that's just a good springboard and being transparent too. So, I look at the month of February and March for me. It has been an emotional month. And let me just say this too, to kind of set a foundation too. A lot of people think that when you have an emotional disorder, it's a mental health disorder. There is a difference between the two. And so when you hear that people have a mental health disorder, it does not mean they have an emotional disorder. The two definitely go hand in hand. But that doesn't mean that because you have emotional dysregulation or emotional, I guess emotional dysregulation is probably the best term. Doesn't mean you have a mental health disorder. It is just part of it. All right. Bless you, Bishop.
Thank you.
Mental health is actually in 4 different areas, four different tenets. And this is what I teach on about mental health. And only one of the 4 is the emotional. The mental health deals with your potential. It deals with your ability to cope with stressors. It deals with your ability to work and your ability to make a contribution to the community. So really, number 2, your ability to cope, that works with your emotions. And so when you think about mental health disorders, and I just want to be clear on that, because some people say, well, girl, you out of whack. What's wrong with you? And so a lot of us define a mental health disorder according to the emotion that we feel. And that we have to be careful of. there are a lot of emotions that go along with mental health disorders, but it doesn't have to mean or vice versa. It doesn't mean vice versa. So I hope you all hear me on that, and we can have more dialogue about that in the future. But I was just thinking February and March was kind of an emotional time for me. So I was seeking an office within the national church of which I'm a part of, Church of God in Christ. And so there were a lot of delays. There were a lot of different things that were going on in particular with that election. And I have no problem being transparent about it. That's just who I am. And I was seeking the office of trustee. Now, the last Saturday, we had the election, and it was 34 candidates running. 15 out of 34 were selected. Unfortunately, I was not one of the 15. And so I was disappointed. And one of the things that I really challenged myself was that how would I handle when I am dealing with disappointment? And you know, Bishop, what happened? Two things I'm done. One of the first things that came to me was what you told us so many months ago, and I've been utilizing it, is that when God does not meet your expectations, he will look for him to exceed those expectations. And so I tell people today that even though I'm disappointed, and it was a tough month for me in March, it's a tough month for me in February. It's been interesting. This last 2 years, February and March, have been very difficult for me emotionally. But I've seen how God has been able to keep me because even when I don't feel like I'm emotionally stable, that doesn't mean that my mind has gone. It just means that I have to learn how to be able to trust him more, how to be able to do what I know that helps to keep me stable. And we're going to talk about some of those things so that I can continue to live my best life. So, I was just thinking about that. So the second thing is that, Bishop, I'm going to come out on top, even though I did not win. And that's really the thing that I was, and I know I'm digressing just a tad. It's like, how is it that when you don't win, but you still come out on top? That was the question I've been asking myself today. Just a little digression. It's like, how is it that you don't win something, but you still come out on top? Again, you have to have some type of grounding. You have to know where your emotions lie, because your emotions can help you to run to a place that you don't want to go. And so this is why we take the time to understand how to be able to regulate the emotions. Doesn't mean you have a mental health disorder. It just means that you want to keep your emotions as stable as possible. All right, Bishop.
No, Dr. Shepard, that was golden. Really, we needed to make that distinction, particularly as conversations become more trendy in this subject, so that we can have a good substratum, a base to which to use our verbiage, and so that is so very important. So I'm glad you brought up those distinctions for our Spirit and Mind audience, and I'll join you in the. So we'll lead by example in this moment, and some persons have already chimed in. We're grateful for that. On the scale from 1 to 10, 10 being chaos. I wouldn't quite say chaos, but I would give it a good 6 to 7 in terms of being a hectic week, hectic month, balancing, pastoring, which in this season is no easy matter, trying to think about what our faith looks like. That you hear the argument sometimes that faith makes you open your church. But the flip is also true. Faith makes you shut down your physical building and believe that God can do what he said he would do in Matthew, that the gates of Hades would not prevail, and that he would preserve his church. That takes faith as well. So deciding what those faith constructs will look like, because we all are subject to theological confirmation bias, where we look for material to back up our own existing biases. And so, but what does faith look like? And so that is an important part of the of that keeps you prayerful. And I'm going to talk about prayer and emotional health, wellness in a moment. But then there's teaching. So I do. Most of you know I teach two university campuses, one long distance and one usually physical, but is now online during this season.
Mhm.
Developing that curriculum, nurturing and trying to be, of course, the caregiver for the spiritual needs of my church community, because I'm a pastor first, and then the needs of the students who are navigating through the difficulties of online learning in the university campus. And I'm writing, trying to do the follow-up book, the critical collaboration, and doing a lot of presentations on faith and mental health in internet presentation forums, for which we are grateful, because it means that people are waking up or becoming conscious of this need that is in our society. So anyway, all of that together, and I haven't even talked about family and responsibilities in home. And so all those things have merged at once. And so I just shared with my leaders, I got a vacation coming up somewhere on the horizon. I have I have preached every Sunday since this pandemic. That's literally over 52 Sundays straight now. And so because I just felt, as long as the Lord was speaking, I said, all right, if you're talking, I'll keep doing it to get through the crises that we're dealing with. But I have scheduled a little getaway.
That's good. That's good.
So anyway, that's just my transparent moment for all of the persons that are starting off. And I see some persons sharing. And so I thank you, Dr. Shepherd. That's what losing but staying on top is what the Bible means when it says more than a conqueror. More than a conqueror. More than a conqueror means we should have lost. Conqueror is evident. But more than a conqueror means I wasn't expected to come out on top. And yet, despite the odds and despite the failure, we're in Holy Week right now. I had a seminary professor who really shook us one day in class when he said, this week represents what appears to be the absolute failure of God. The absolute failure. The death. The Son of God, an absolute apparent defeat, and yet comes out on top. And so I thank you for saying that, because that quickened with me, Dr. Shepherd, this week, because we are more than conquerors, expected to lose, looking like it's over, and yet God finds a way to bring us out on top. And in all these things, is what he says, killed all day long, counted as sheep for the slaughter. That's the apparent, looks like this should have killed you. But in all these things, we are more than conquerors, because we overcame what was expected to be the end. And so I want to speak that over everybody's life, that whatever looks like it's defeating you, may it work for your good, according to the word of God. So, Dr. Shepherd, we started off. So where do we want to go from here with emotional, living your best life emotionally?
Yeah, so let's just take it a little bit further. I know that Bishop has some scriptures and some points and some tenets, and so I'm just going to help. Since we have his outline, we're just going to kind of bounce back and forth off of that. And so one of the things that really struck me was being able to be aware of your emotions and your reactions. This is how you're able to live your best life. And Bishop will go over the scripture and things like that, but I just kind of want to set him up for that. Be aware of your feelings and your reactions. One of the things that I went back to, even as we have talked about emotional regulation before, is this whole idea about numbing. This period of time, if you're not careful, can cause you to go numb. It really has. And really, it ties into what I talked about earlier with the whole plateauing. When you get to a plateau, you kind of can become stable, and then you begin to not be affected as much by what is going on around you. There's something that's called psychophysical numbing. It's a form of numbing, and when we don't really differentiate between what is happening on a large scale basis. So, what am I saying? In relation to what is happening with the COVID-19 pandemic, we look at the hundreds of thousands of people who have died. I think we're approaching 540,000. Actually, I think we're past it now. I think we're approaching 550,000, over 500,000 people plus. Just unbelievable. It's even hard for us to understand, to grasp that number of people dying in a 1 year's time, a little more than a 1 year's time. And if we're not careful, we'll just allow that number just to kind of sit out there as just a number, but we don't feel the grief, we don't feel the loss, we don't feel the impact. And that's what happens when we don't take time to express our emotions and our reactions. I was dealing in clinic this past week with a young man who was talking about the death of his mother. And it really was an unfortunate accident how his mother died. His mother died on her way back home from dialysis. And she was in one of those vans that transport people medically. And the van got into an accident. The bus, I should say, got into an accident, and she ended up dying a few days later because she wasn't strapped in right. So such a sad case. And the reason why I mention this is because the young man said he dealt with it on his own. He said that he, as he was talking about it, there was no type of emotion. There was no type of, there was reverence, definitely, but you just didn't feel like he was, as he was describing, you just didn't feel it. Like, I felt more sad than he did. And so I asked him about it, and he said, well, I already dealt with it. It was clear that he had dealt with it because there was no type of sadness. Now, I'm not saying you got to be crying and falling out and things like that, but there should be some type of show of emotion that, as you're describing what happened to his mother, and it just happened just maybe a couple of years ago, and he didn't show any sign to that. And so I think that this is an appropriate example to talk about right now, about expressing your feelings in appropriate ways, because he had been taught that, yes, he can talk about it, but he couldn't show any type of emotion with it. He felt that showing emotion to that would show some type of weakness, or that he wasn't over it. What I want to let people know today is that in these sessions with Spirit in Mind, as we're talking about living your best life, if there's something that is disappointing you, if there's something that is hurting you, if there's something that you're ashamed of, if there's something that you're angry about, now I'm going through all the emotions now. If there's something that that you just really just frustrates you, there's a way in how to be able to express that, because when you don't express the emotions, let me tell you, it's going to tell off on you. It's going to show off on you in some way or another. And we want to be careful of the whole numbing piece. We want to make sure that, and Bishop, I'm throwing it to you now, be careful or be aware of how you express those emotions, and make sure you do it in an appropriate way.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's so helpful. And I'll start off, and let me just say by way of this, because sometimes the chat line, I enjoy the conversation. I thank you for putting your responses about your emotional awareness. That's why we asked you to do that, because of Dr. Shepherd talking about, as he just finished, the importance of kind of not suppressing or repressing these emotions. And that's why, honestly, I gave it to you in a numerical form. And I see Sister Hackshaw for putting a 5 up there. Those kind of things give qualitative numbers to it and help us to avoid avoidance by churchy language, if you will. How was your week this week? Blessed and highly favored.
Right.
Understood. I got you. But I'm not in the pulpit right now. but how do you qualify that? And so when you say 1 to 10, you begin to put qualifiers on it that can be subjective to have that kind of conversation. And so that's the reason for the numerical measuring, lest we either suppress or repress. Suppression being intentional, repression being unconscious, and so that's great language. I appreciate y'all putting that number on it, and we'll talk more about that as we continue. But so let's talk about. I want to talk about emotionally healthy spirituality. That's a term really used by Peter Sorrow. But it's so applicable to what we're talking about today. And I want to submit to you that emotional and spiritual health are joined together. That's sort of like my thesis. Emotional and spiritual health are joined together. Our relationship with God and with others are two sides of the same coin. And so this idea that Dr. Shepard was talking about being aware of our emotions can even help in our relationship with others. And so our relationship issues, our interpersonal affairs can be helped by our own self-awareness or emotional intelligence. And so one suggestion that for consideration is to practice. Well, first of all, remember the scriptures. Let's start with the scriptures. There's an interesting scripture in Jeremiah where the Lord says, to Jeremiah, the heart, meaning my internal self, my mind, will, and emotions, that internal self. He says, the heart is deceitful above all things. That's that unconscious repression of emotions and suppression of emotions. The heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I, the Lord, test the mind. What a powerful concept to start off with. So I want to start off with this idea, kind of playing off of Zorro is an amazing guy on emotional healthy spirituality and emotional healthy leader. See, somebody's familiar with his work. He went before me, but he graduated from the same program in biblical psychology that I did. But anyway, Acts 7, practice contemplative spirituality. That's my first suggestion. Practice contemplative spirituality. Dr. Shepard just talked about being aware of your emotions and reactions, expressing your feelings in appropriate ways, and keeping a gratitude journal. I'll just deal with those four, and Dr. Shepard will partner with me as we continue. But I want to focus on the first one for the next few minutes. Practice contemplative spirituality. The Lord, Joshua 1:8 talks about meditating on the word. Psalm 1 talks about it as well. His delight is in the law, meaning for them the word of the Lord. And in that law, in that word, does the blessed person meditate both day and night. By contemplative spirituality, this is what I mean. It means prayerful awareness and response to the presence, the power, and the things of God in our lives. I'm going to say that again. Prayerful awareness and response to the presence, the power, and the things of God in our lives. I'll say it a third time. Contemplative spirituality is prayerful awareness and response to the presence, power, and the things of God in our lives. Now, I say that because prayer has become an overly familiar word in Christian dialogue. Much like you heard Dr. Shepard trying to make sure that as psychology becomes more, if you will, in the mainstream, that the trendiness of it doesn't create a kind of familiarity and abuse of it, or misinterpretation and familiarity and dismissal of it. People say, I don't want to talk to a shrink and all that kind of stuff. That's dismissing what is really serious. Well, I submit to you that the same can happen in theological language, that prayer is something that we all kind of say, okay. But when you really study the prayer, the ancient fathers of the church, it is innately helpful to emotional regulation. Why? The early fathers of the early church is to really teach that there were three dimensions of prayer. there is vocal prayer, there is meditation, and then there is contemplation. There's vocal prayer. That's when we pray in the spirit and in the understanding. And if you will, cast all our cares. We come boldly before the throne. We petition God, Jesus on the main line, tell him what you want. And we dump, and it's the catharsis. That's the vocal prayer. There's the meditation, is the waiting and the reflecting on what we just shared and waiting on God to respond. Now, there's a difference between praying and doing our catharsis and dumping and casting all our cares and then getting up and leaving, but not allowing the response. Dr. Shepherd, imagine a client who comes into the office and then just does all of their cares, all of their presenting issues before the therapist can ask any probative questions, point out any ambiguities, do anything to provoke any other kind of thought and self-awareness. Before the therapist could do any of that, the client said, I'm up, I'm done, thank you. Just dumped, just wanted to leave that there. Well, that certainly is their right, but it's not necessarily the most productive transformation process, because they really just brought all their presenting issues, left them on the table, and then left out the room. And sometimes that's how we can be tempted to pray. To kind of just say, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. And that's the vocal prayer, but never allowing the moment of meditation that leads to the moment of contemplation. The early church fathers taught that contemplation was the phase of God's visitation and response. Like in the book of Acts, we see Cornelius praying at the 9th hour of the day, and he prays until an angel comes and gives him a response. Or we see Peter praying on the roof of Simon the tanner's house, and he prays until God puts him in a trance and then begins to speak to him and respond. And so we have to stay at the altar so that God can show us our heart, as Jeremiah said, show us our motivations, show us our true emotions, so that what has been repressed subconsciously can come to the surface. So God can show us ourselves and show us our emotional state so that we can be true to ourselves. We can show us when our hurt is talking and show us when our anger is talking and help us to be angry but sin not. All those things are because of the going through the process of the vocal prayer to meditation to contemplation. Mama was right, and I'll close with this. Dr. Shepherd, please help. Feel free to chime in here. There was something to be said, and if you've ever been in the military or just had an old school parental figure, you knew that when you entered the presence of authority, you didn't leave until you got your release. If you're in the presence of a superior officer in the military, you stay in the presence of the superior officer until that officer says dismissed. If you ate at the table of your parents, I know we got all kinds of situations now, but this is old school. If you ate at the dinner table, you didn't just jump up and leave, but you got excused. If you've ever been in the classroom, and you waited until the teacher said, even sometimes when the bell rang, the teacher would say, wait till I dismiss you. Because there's something about that. In fact, if you had a mama like mine, if you answered the wrong way and stormed out the room, mama would call you back in the room and say, try that again.
Right.
And then you would have to answer. I see you, some of y'all know what I'm talking about. And then you could be dismissed. That's because I want you to transfer that principle to how we have the power in prayer to go boldly before the throne. But think about that language. That's the language of royalty. You don't just leave the king's presence at will. But there's something to be said about praying until we get our release. Well, I'm going to fall asleep. Sometimes that might be good because that means the Lord can give you a dream, to be Freudian, so that the subconscious can come conscious, so that he can lift those things from all the defense mechanisms and what we call peeling the layers of the onion of all of your defense strategies that you've been using to repress and suppress your emotions. Sometimes it is in the dreaming stage that subconscious stuff can become conscious. So stay in meditation. If you doze off, maybe that's how the Lord wants to get your attention and bring some things to the surface. Maybe you'll dream while you sleep and the Lord can talk to you. But that contemplative prayer dimension is hard to do in a culture that stays as busy as ours. But it is unmannerly to excuse ourselves from the presence of power without a dismissal. That's why the old saints talked about praying through. It means pray through my emotions, pray through my presenting issue, and wait until the Lord gives a response. And so that'll help regulate some of our emotions as well. So that's why I wanted to start with that contemplative spirituality. Dr. Shepherd, help us out here.
Yeah, Bishop, that was very good. Thank you for breaking that down. I just have a couple seconds and then we're going to keep moving because I see our time is getting away from us. But you said it, and I'll just say it in a different way, that emotional regulation requires discipline. And that is something that so many of us need and desire more of. We need more of the discipline that is required so that we can live our best life. Discipline sometimes becomes an ugly term, it becomes an ugly word, and it's associated with having to submit to somebody and trying to say that somebody's over somebody else, or that you don't have the guts to stand up. There's just a whole lot of bad connotations goes along with the word discipline. But unfortunately, a lot of those things are in error. There's nothing wrong with discipline. A disciplined life is what God calls for us to live, and we must be disciplined even in our emotions. And let me tell you, that's one of the areas where I really think that we need to spend more time in. We need to be more disciplined in our money, the financial piece. We talked about that. We need to be more disciplined in our social areas, more disciplined in our physical areas, more disciplined in our intellectual and spiritual. So really, discipline applies to all three. But one of the areas where we don't focus a whole lot, rarely, I'll just say that, is how to be disciplined in our emotions. Too many times we are emotionally charged in our decisions. We're emotionally charged when it comes to preparing for worship, or even in worship, or even in our daily activities. And what God wants us to know is that when you are disciplined in your emotions, as I've talked about the different 6 areas, it allows for all those other areas to really fall right in line so you can do what is best in all those areas. So I'll just leave it alone at that. Just wanted to add that word discipline is necessary, is a necessity for us to be able to live our best life in all 6 areas, truthfully.
Absolutely. Proverbs 16:32 talks about discipline this way. It says, he that ruleth his own spirit is mightier than he that takes a city. Which means it's easier to take a city than it is to discipline our own emotional awareness. Think about what that's saying. And so, because it is a discipline, and it is discipline is part of the word of actually discipleship. If we are called to be Jesus's disciples, discipleship is the state of being disciplined. That's literally what it means. And so some of that can come through prayer. Like what one of the persons said, my mom told me to pray things into peace. Oh my goodness. Into shalom, into the wholeness, until things start coming together. Wonderful, wonderful. And so, yes. So that's one way that we can do that, is practicing contemplative spirituality. Let me just add this last little practice you might want to add in contemplative spirituality. Ignatius Loyola called it the prayer of examine or examination, which means at the end of the day, your last day, run the day through your head, like in prayer, and meaning go through it. What did I do today? How did I feel about what I experienced today? And allow the Lord, think of it as a videotape, but let it run through your head in the prayer moment, in the meditation part of prayer. Let it run through the day. Today, ooh, the office was really rough. Let it run through your head. Ooh, today I had to clean up the house and do homework with the kids. Let it run through, but allow the Lord to hit the pause button at any place the Spirit of the Lord wants to do it. And say, I want you to stop right there, where you had to stop working to go deal with the kids who are home from school, and then had a phone call, gave you some bad news. I want to stay right there. Pause. How'd you feel? That's reflecting on the day. That's not now lay me down to sleep, pray the Lord my soul to keep, and jumping into bed. That's taking the moments to go from vocal prayer to meditation to contemplation, allowing the Lord to speak to those issues. Try that. Consider that this week. Spending at the end of every day, replaying the day in the presence of the Lord. That's the contemplative part of it. Make a routine of the last 7 minutes of my day before I go to bed. The last 5 minutes, I'm going to sing a song of worship or listen to 1 minute of my favorite song and go into prayer. Then I'm going to spend a few minutes just being, letting the Lord respond to different parts of my day. And letting him speak to those matters. And then I'm going to go to bed and rest in the Lord. Just consider trying that and see what that does in terms of emotional regulation. So that's one thing. The second thing that we have, in addition to practicing contemplative prayer in our time is getting away. This is always so much fun on Spirit and Mind. But the other thing, in addition to that, is practice contemplative spirituality. Dr. Shepherd gave this one: be aware of your emotions and reactions. And again, I just quoted that Proverbs that controlling your spirit, having that discipline, is mightier than taking a whole city. Dr. Shepherd, I don't know if you want to add to any of that.
No, Bishop. I think that for that, we want to make sure people understand that your emotions can get you into a situation that you may not be ready for. So you want to make sure that that discipline is one of the things that we want you to really try hard at working at this year, 2021. I'll just say this. And again, I'm purposely making my responses shorter today, because again, I'm even working on how I'm being disciplined in how I handle myself today, and being able to address what needs to be addressed, hit it and quit it, because there's so much that we got to say. But this year, look at how you will handle a situation different from how you handled it last year. Just check that out. With these tools that we have armed you with this year, do something different. If that child made you upset, try something different this time, as opposed to throwing the shoe at him or throwing the shoe at her. And watch how the response, it might even scare the child. They'd be like, are you okay? I've seen it. And when you switch up your response because you're not emotionally charged, then watch how they'll become even more amicable or agreeable to what you're asking for them to do. Just try it.
Absolutely. And so it's in terms of being aware of your emotions and reactions. That's the second thing. And that meaning try to address, even when that's why we started with the prayer. So the Lord would show us. But try to address or change the things that trigger negative emotions. You know what? I tend to feel this way when I'm dealing or in this environment. Okay, then how should I address it? You know what? Every time I'm in, and what things are optional? What things can I change? What relationships can I reevaluate? But that is addressing and changing the things that trigger negative emotions. And what are your triggers? What kind of contributes to putting me in a certain state of mind? And what can I do differently? Whether it be a different strategy of dealing, a different way of reacting, as Dr. Shepard just said, or minimizing my exposure, or getting some different coping skills, coping strategies. But recognizing our triggers is a part of being aware of our emotional reactions. Thirdly, we talked about this, kind of goes right into it. Express your feelings or our feelings in appropriate ways. To be angry, but sin not.
Mm-hmm.
Is Ephesians 4:6. And so this idea of being able to say, I'm angry. This is disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really disappointed about how this turned out. This wasn't what I expected. But be able to express our feelings and let people, again, because how self-awareness and interpersonal relationships are intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to let people know when something is bothering you.
Mm-hmm.
In an appropriate way. Keep feelings of sadness or anger. Well, know that keeping those feelings bottled up can add to stress, and Dr. Shepard can talk better about that. But it can cause problems. But learn how to express ourselves. In marriage family therapy training, it's kind of important to learn that it can be deceptive to think that, oh, we're great, we never argue, we never disagree. And never having a disagreement is not necessarily the sign of health. It's learning to express those disagreements in appropriate ways. What was one marriage family therapist called it, it's not about never fighting, if you will. You can use a better term, but to use his quote, it's about fighting fairly. It's about disagreeing in a particular way or expressing our feelings in appropriate ways. I'm really a little angry right now. It's not the best time to talk.
Right.
Being able to say that. So Dr. Shepard, take us from here.
I was just going to say, Bishop, as you were saying that, we want to be careful of those who are passive aggressive too. We want to be mindful that if you know that you're feeling something, you want to be able to express it, but express it in a respectful manner, and you just hit on it at the right times. Sometimes it's not the right time to be able to express how you feel. You want to be able to express how you feel, but you want to make sure it's at a appropriate time. And so many times we can be dragged into situations where it's not the right time. And because you haven't had a chance to settle on it, many times I will write something and I'll just let it sit and I'll come back to it. And then when I come back to it, I realize that I was so emotionally charged, and I go back and I start to take the things out that I could learn how to reword it in such a way in which I'm still saying the same message, but it's in the delivery. And so we have to be able to do just those things. But then the passive aggressive, don't sit there and act like something's not bothering when your demeanor, your body language is telling off on you, so to speak. Again, this is how we live our best life emotionally. Because when your emotions are getting the best of you, and this is one of the things that is coming up next, is it will take over even your physical body. It'll cause you to have your heart racing, your blood pressure to be increased. It'll have you sweating and in that anxious state of mode, in that fight or flight response mode. And so we want to be careful of that.
Absolutely. And probably the last one we'll get to today is keep a gratitude journal. Or as the psalmist put it in Psalm 103, forget not all of his benefits. I say that because there's been some recent evidence, and I was reading some great research by UC Berkeley and Yale and some others that did some great experiments. And in these experiments, they kind of had a control group that went to therapy sessions, and they just kind of did the traditional therapeutic methods. Then they had another group that was an experimental group and just talked about what was going wrong. Just presented all of their problems in the therapeutic setting. It was a great catharsis, all this, but only what's wrong. And then they had a third group that they encouraged to keep a gratitude journal as a part of their therapeutic work outside of session. So they talked about what was wrong, they talked about concerns, but they also kept a journal of the things for which they were grateful. And the group that made the quickest progress in their findings was the group that, it wasn't the group that did traditional therapy, it wasn't the group that just talked about their problems, but it was the group that kept the gratitude journal along with the traditional therapeutic methods. So it said something about the power of gratitude in our overall health. And so I thought that from that study, I took away how great it would be to keep a gratitude journal. And Psalm 103 came to mind. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all soul, my mind, will, and emotions, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all of his benefits. So even in the midst of hectic days, and even it's not denying those things, but it's also finding that even in the midst of those, there's something for which to be grateful. And so I just thought maybe you might want to try that, Spirit and Mind family. In the midst of it, we have to be honest. We have to own our emotions, have to say this was not a good day. We have to be able to say the psalmist talks about bad days too. My tears have been my meat day and night. My heart is overwhelmed. So, but in the midst of that, it's not denying those things, because we have to be able to own those or acknowledge those. But at the same time, take a list of some things for which we are grateful.
Absolutely. And Bishop, that's what I've done. Just even again, this past week, I've reflected on the lessons that I have learned thus far in 2020 throughout this pandemic. I'll just say lessons learned through the pandemic. And you have to go back and do that. That actually helps you to go back and see how far you have come. We just don't want to age biologically. But we want to age in our emotions. What does that mean, Dr. Shepherd? We want to mature. We want to allow the things that have occurred to us not to set us back, but allow for the growth to occur, so that as we mature, as we age in our emotions, there's going to be certain things that will come to us that we did not expect, that will rattle us, so to speak. But yet, because we have learn how to be able to live our best life emotionally, then those things, yes, they will upset us. The emotion will come, but it won't take us off course. The emotion will come, but it won't sink us and kill us for dead. The emotion will come, but you'll be able to bounce back up. And so with that said, that gratitude journal allows for that to happen. You capture those moments when you are feeling your worst. And that's what David did. He captured those moments when he was feeling at his lowest point, but he did not stay there. And what I want to tell you is that capture these moments. It was okay for you to say, I'm functioning, but I'm not okay. But God has kept you. And as you go back and you read back, sometimes I do that. I go back and look at some of the things that even I wrote this time last year. And I look at how God has kept me. I look at how God has advanced me. I look how God has elevated me. And so that shows to me, thank you. I say thank you because God has kept me, but I also say thank you for the maturity. Thank you for the aging of the emotions. I like saying that. It's a thank you for my ability to go forward. And so with that said, I challenge you all, don't be scared. Write it down. Write down what you're feeling right now. I see those who had 4s and 3s during this particular week. That's okay. You wrote it. But let's see where you are even next week. Let's see where you are a month from now. Let's see where you are 2 months from now. Are you still at a 3? Are you still at a 4? Somebody said, I went to a 1. That's okay. But let's see how God will continue to elevate you as you continue to mature in your emotions.
Yes, that consistency over time is a big deal. So, yes, please, thank you, Dr. Shepard, for saying that. Please continue with, if you consider continuing with these practices that we've given, and we'll continue to talk about them in future broadcasts. So we'll leave on that. We're keeping the gratitude journal. Listen, I can't think of anything more appropriate. This is Holy Week, and Holy Week is a reminder. It's not ignoring the darkness, but this week is a reminder that as Dr. Shepard said, he learned from even some disappointments and learned from even some things that didn't go as desired or expected, as did I. And so it's that reminder that this Holy Week is a reminder. Think about what it means, that life comes out of death. That except the seed go into the ground and die, it cannot bring forth much fruit. And the whole point of Christianity is that God gets glory even out of the things that look dead and done. And that's the whole point of it. And if you think about it, it's been prophesied since Genesis. Genesis, from the very beginning, says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. Then God said, let there be light. Don't miss what that means. It means that light comes out of darkness. Darkness was first. That's why it says, and the evening and the morning was the first day. Mm-hmm. Darkness was first. And then light. God speaks and causes light to come out of darkness. That's an incredible thing. That's why in the ancient Judeo tradition, really the day begins at sunset, because a new day doesn't begin when the sun rises. It actually begins when the sun leaves, because the day always ends with the sun rising, and the evening and the morning. Thus, that's why the psalmist said, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning, because in the Judeo tradition, a day really consists of first the evening, then the morning. We do it the exact opposite way. Right. But a full day starts in darkness and ends in light. And so that's just, and hope comes from disappointment. And so some things are disappointing. Isn't that what the men on the road to Emmaus said? When they were on their way after disappointment of Calvary, they said, we had hoped. Don't miss the language. We had hope that Jesus was going to be the Redeemer. There again, I'd leave where I started. It looked like a failure. We had hope, but it looks like that hope is gone. And by the time Jesus finished, they got their hope back. And so we thank God for being able to restore hope. And that's how we want to close. Dr. Shepard, I don't know if you want to pray or add, close out on that. But
I'll just say this in our closing. Please tell somebody about Spirit in Mind. We want to make sure that you are sharing these episodes. We're sharing it with our social networks. This should be a blessing to so many people. spiritinmind.vidflex.tv. Stay tuned. We're going to hopefully be able to replay some of these particular episodes. We've gone through almost 2 months, Bishop. Can you believe that? 2 months of dealing with living your best life in those different areas, those 6 different areas. And so this has been a blessing. We're not saying we're concluding it right now. We'll let you know. But we've just about concluded with the emotional piece. We probably got a few more things to add on probably for next week. But let me tell you, that's how I want to conclude, that you want to make sure that you are sharing this with someone, because this year, 2021, is such a pivotal year. It has been a dark year for many, all right? And God is now calling us out of light. He's bringing vaccines. He's bringing other methods for us to be able to recover from this pandemic. So he's bringing us out. We just don't want you to look the same when you come out.
My goodness. Selah. And thank you for joining us on Spirit in Mind.